Morning, everyone. Hope we're well. So I think we're going to start doing some lessons on Google Meet, which in some ways could be quite useful because you can ask me some questions. Say, can you just explain that again? That's really complicated. So there are some benefits of Google Meet. I will have to give you a time though because of all my things going on in my house and kids running in and all the rest of it. So there's the pros and cons of it, and I'll probably end up doing it maybe once a week, not every lesson. This is not practical for me to do that, but we'll see where we're going. So first of all, just make sure you look very carefully through that document so you can access the textbook online. If you have any issues with that, let me know. We can either try and solve it technically, or if worst comes to the worst, we'll try and get some books and I'll just drop one at your house or whatever. So here we go in terms of this topic. So really what this is about how Black Americans are treated in America and how they kind of fought for their equal rights, their civil rights. The reality is if you are black in America, you're more likely to go to prison than you are to university. That's the reality. And I saw a very sad story this week where a black man was jogging in a white suburban neighbourhood and was shot and killed by some random people because they didn't want him in his neighbourhood. So there are some huge issues with race in America. Very, very complicated issue. I'm going to sort of look through this. So an overview of the course. Again, this is, I'm teaching the majority of the A level. So this is 60 marks and you'll be doing 3 essays on the in the exam. So there's going to be a source-based question and there's going to be a knowledge question, and you have to do an optional question, which is about geography and film and literature, which I'll discuss later. So the main topics there are the 5 topics in red. So we're going to start with the kind of end of the Civil War, go into what happened in the South, New Deal, Martin Luther King, and then obviously the election of a black president in America. So this is a really, really interesting topic. So quite a lot that's related to what we've done in the past in our previous topic about politics and stuff like that. So just to clarify, so how did they justify slavery? Obviously, that's a horrible, horrific institution. And really lots of Americans or white people, because Africans did not look like Europeans, considered them to be inferior to Europeans. Secondly, it was creating a huge amount of money. And there's this kind of very patronising attitude that black people were uneducated and kind of needed this kind of paternal being looked after by their kind of, slave owners and were looking after you. Obviously none of that is justifiable ever or in the modern world. So I'll have a timeline, I'll have a timeline. So just a bit of background about American history. So the Declaration of Independence, 4th of July. The population of America at that time was about 2.5 million. About 500,000 of them were black slaves. At this point, obviously, the Declaration of Independence is all about liberty, freedom, all those kind of things we looked at with France, individual rights. But at this point, there was no consideration of blacks for freedom. I mean, George Washington famously was a slave owner himself. So when they were drafting up the U.S. Constitution, the infamous document, they actually classified black Americans as 3/5 of a person. We're going to look at why that was. There's a very good reason why they did that. And it's also important to understand that when they made the Constitution, that they were very clear about the power of the federal government, i.e. Washington, the national government, that's what they called it, federal government, and the power of the state government, so the power of Texas or Mississippi or New York or whatever. And all these things led to the Civil War, which I'm going to touch upon later, and the breakaway of the 13 Confederate states. There's a Confederate flag there that broke away from the United States. So that's a kind of general background. So it's also important to understand that obviously our system of government, has kind of grown organically, from William I, the feudal system, as we've looked at 1832, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. So we have this kind of hotchpotch system of like a queen who's still technically our leader, signs off laws. We've got a peculiar system of having, lords. Our system really, if we're being brutally honest, is old-fashioned and probably not fit for purpose in the modern world. Is it democratic? Not particularly. So I think what is important to understand about the American system of government, it was designed from the beginning. And I think they looked at different countries, different systems, and I really do think it's a beautiful thing. And obviously people are worried about Trump as the executive. But actually, there's lots of things to kind of check his power, make sure that he's not too powerful. So really, American democracy was born out of a revolution, fed up of being told what to do by London. And really, they designed their own system that was fair and all those kind of things. So this is what the main focus of today's lesson is going to be about. It goes without saying, America is a huge country, covers 6 time zones. Just put you on there, Texas is the size of pretty much Western Europe. And that's quite important going forward because, when we're looking at things in a few months, we'll be thinking, well, how can they possibly think that? Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi there on the map is a long, long way away from Washington. They don't care about what people in Washington think. They're going to make their own decisions about what they think. So the scale of America needs to be always in your mind as well. We live in a tiny, tiny country. So the executive, i.e. we would know that as a presidency. So the president is elected every 4 years. And generally, they are elected on what they call a balance ticket. So, for example, Obama was a black man, so his vice president was a white older guy. So he was a young black man, he went for a white older guy. Man, woman, they try and do a balance ticket like that. But generally speaking, if the president's from the north, they normally go for a vice president from the south, and we'll look at the importance of that later on. The legislative, i.e. their parliament, is called Congress, and again, this was designed very clearly. So there's 2 houses. So their equivalent of the House of Lords is called the Senate. The difference is they're elected, and there are 100 senators, and the reason for that is because there's 50 states, and they get two senators per state. So it doesn't matter if you're California, population of about 60 million, or you're Hawaii, population of about, 1 million. Both those states both get 2. Now, the reason for that is because they didn't want bigger states dominating smaller states, and they wanted smaller states to have a voice within the United States. You often get this in the UK. The Scottish don't feel that they have a strong enough voice in the UK, the Welsh, etc., etc. So senators are elected for 6 years, and they roll the elections every 2 years, so a third of the House is being re-elected every 2 years. The lower house is called the House of Representatives, the House of Reps. There are 435 members, and basically each state is awarded the number of members in how big their population. So, for example, California gets 53 because it's the most populous state. Hawaii only gets 2. So, in some ways, you could say that's slightly fairer, more proportional, and they only serve for 2 years, and they get elected every even year. So there'll be one. Where are we? 2020 probably won't be an election this year, but we will see. So that's the way this sort of broken out. And then finally, and people forget about this, the third branch of government is the judiciary, i.e. the Supreme Court. So there are the 9 current Supreme Court judges. Now, they are incredibly important. You could argue probably more important than the president. One, they serve a life term. So their job really is to review all laws, and they can change the laws, they can say that's unconstitutional, etc., etc. So they are selected by the president, and they're confirmed by Congress. So if a Supreme Court judge resigns or dies or is ill, the president is really happy about that because, in a morbid way, because he can put his own man or woman into the Supreme Court. So, for example, they'd be aware of judges who are pro or against abortion or pro or against drugs or whatever it is. They want their own person on that court. So that's really important, as we will look at later on. The Supreme Court is probably one of the more important areas we're going to look at. So, huge amount of information now. I appreciate that. Now, annoyingly, if you look in the book, it's no page number. It's actually page 69. It's kind of says extend your knowledge. There's a little bit of information about the structure of the US government. What I want you to do is print off this slide, get 3 colours, and I've done the first one for you, so the executive is in red, the legislative is in green, the judiciary is in blue. And all I want you to do is kind of like shade through the legislative stuff and the judiciary in the colour that is related to the other one. So let me just explain that. Does it make any sense what I just said? So, for example, the executive, in order to check the balance, the power of the legislative, has the ability to veto any bill coming from Congress. So say, for example, Congress puts a bill in and they say we want to ban guns. Okay, Trump can just go, no thanks, we're not going to do it. Okay, so if you look on the legislative branch, the third bullet point there, it says the Congress can override the presidential veto with a 2/3 majority. So you just need to shade that in red because that's where they have power over the executive. Also, what is important, the executive has, if there's say for example in the Senate there's a tie, because obviously 100 could be 50-50. This has happened famously a few times. The VP will have the deciding vote. The executive can also pardon criminals, and this is its power over the judiciary. And very importantly, it can nominate judges to the Supreme Court. So this is quite tricky. So all I want you to do is just go through the legislative. So you literally just go through the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bullet points on the left-hand side and the 2 on the right-hand side. So, for example, impeach the president. So, Trump has been talked about being impeached, how you get rid of him. So you would shade that one in red because that gives Congress power over the executive. So go through, try and think about which one and how they check and balance each other. Okay.